Christine. You're very, very welcome, Christine.
Thanks, Chris.
So Christine is a very experienced chartered surveyor, investor. I was going to say know-it-all leasehold person.
That would be fair.
You won't know this, but we have a WhatsApp group, and I've sent the Property World link to your to those podcasts because I found them so useful. So
good, excellent, thank you.
So I would just reiterate that, but you're really welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Not a problem. Now, just say at the outset, I've been up since 2:30 this morning, seeing my son and his wife off to Hamburg, where their baby is going to be born in a month's time, because Lena's parents were over there. Wow. And then I drove all the way to the north and then all the way back. And yeah, I got back at 7:10. So if I start talking complete and utter gibberish, I see Sue Maxwell-Smith here.
Yes, she is.
Is she hiding? Yeah, she is hiding. No camera, Sue, very naughty. So she'll say probably I talk gibberish most of the time, but I'll try my best not to. So I can hear you giggling, Sue.
In actual fact, Sue did suggest you as a.
Okay, well, I'll try not to disappoint because I don't want to get on the wrong side of SMS. Thank you very much, under any circumstances. I don't have any slides, okay, so apologies for that, but I got back too late and I'm on the wrong laptop. I don't know where my laptop is, so we are where we are. Just a bit of background for everyone. As Chris said, I'm a chartered surveyor. I've been a chartered surveyor since 1989. God, that's a long time, isn't it? And a fellow of the RICS since 2000. In my career, I've done just about everything you could think of to do in surveying. I started in the days when the graduates didn't follow what they do now, which is a very restrictive path of competency. So they will follow quite a narrow path now in a particular area. I started in the days when you had to do a bit of everything, literally everything, before you decided on what you really wanted to do. And because I quite liked most of it, I spent my whole career doing various things, one after the other. So asset management for institutional investors, occupier management, acquisitions, working as a consultant for corporates, structured finance, development, valuation of all different sorts. I've been a partner in charge of a team of commercial surveyors. I used to be head of property at 2 national estate agents, and I've been a consultant to people like Grosvenor and Mencap and various, done lots of work for local authorities. So I've sort of done a bit of everything. So I'm a bit of a jack of all trades. Hopefully I am a master of a few of those things. And I know, Chris, you wanted me to talk about leases tonight, which I'm happy to do.
Yeah, that would be great. And title splitting would be...
title splitting, which is a phrase that I find quite aggravating. I'm just going to turn the volume up on you a bit if I can. I can't find it.
So
there you are. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
because to me, it's not splitting; it's layering. But I'm just being pedantic.
Okay.
So, I mean, I'm happy to do whichever first, and I don't know how long people want to stay because the last time I did this sort of thing, we went on for 2.5 hours, and Yes. I've got my glass of wine, but other people may not have theirs.
We're fine. Lisa's got her wine, so that's fine.
Okay, excellent. Cheers.
Also, I just wondered whether anybody else had got any topics or anything they were.
Yeah, absolutely. It was interesting actually to listen to that discussion about mortgages for buy-to-lets and serviced accommodation, all the rest of it. Only because I do get asked quite a lot about HMOs and valuation of HMOs and people having expectations. They set up an HMO, it might be in an Article 4 area, they might have a license, but they don't understand why they're not being valued on an investment commercial basis by an income multiplier. And I'm afraid the rule is always the same. Take the people out. If it's a house, it's valued by the comparable method, like you would value your own house if you put it up for sale. And there is basically no exception for that unless you get to a certain size, 7 rooms and above. The RICS has special rules. So in the same way, the value has been driven by the RICS requirements on particular types of property and valuation methodology in terms of serviced accommodation and Back to let holiday lets.
So I've had people say previously that like if you've got an ensuite in every bedroom, then that would be a basis for valuing a HMO on a commercial basis rather than, say, bricks and mortar. You called it something else, actually. You talked about taking the people out, but
comparable. It's just like selling a house. It's just like valuing a house. Compare it with other similar houses in as local of an area as possible. Adjust for the differences, and out pops a number. And then you would compare it. Then, as a value, you would compare it to a square foot basis by comparison to make sure it wasn't wildly out of kilter. That's generally how they're done. Yeah.
Okay. Because I know there's people on the call that convert houses to HMOs, and so it's
depends how big they are. 7 bedrooms and above, there's a special method of valuation, which takes into account it's probably not going to be just a house.
Yeah, so 7 above. So 7, you need planning.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that the reason why it's 7?
No, I don't think particularly. I think the rule of 7 came before all the changes to planning and HMOs and what is an HMO, what isn't an HMO, and how many people, how many households, all those things that seem to just dribble in over time. The rule of 7 really has come predated that by many years, in that if the house is that large, how big is your market for a purchaser? That's fundamentally the question. If it's in an area full of 7-bed houses, then obviously there's a market. If it isn't, then maybe there isn't, and maybe the valuer has to think a bit more creatively about how they're going to value that property.
So can I just ask very quickly on that? Yeah. So if I saw a property, which I did recently, which I think had been, or whether it has been still, I'm not sure, run as a B&B, and it's got 7 bedrooms plus with en suites to most of them, would that be classed in that category then?
It would. Well, 7 beds and above, you would definitely have to start thinking about how you're going to value that property, and it would be entirely dependent on the individual property, the area that it's in. If it was going to continue as a B&B, then it would be a business. So you're valuing the business really, not the property as such.
And the 7-bedroom rule, again, does it then take into consideration the number of living rooms in addition to that? Because obviously a lot of people will convert what were living reception rooms as such into bedrooms.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got what is obviously a 5-bed house that had 2 reception rooms and a big kitchen diner, and 2 of the reception rooms are being used for bedrooms, then if you took the people out, it's a 5-bed house.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's I was going to say it's the valuers should be using their common sense. You may think valuers don't have any, and I take that on board entirely. But it is a matter of fact and degree and location and circumstances. So there's no sort of one rule. It's not really a 7-bed rule. It's a guide. It's a guide to valuers, not just to take things completely on face value.
Good question.
And to be honest, a holiday let, traditional holiday let, like I own a letters and management business, and my business manages holiday lets. We're in the North Cotswolds, so there's a lot of them. But if you took away the holiday let element, and you were selling that property, and the person buying it didn't want to run a holiday let, I mean, they wanted to live in it, then the valuation is just by comparable of other similar properties, which would be probably nothing like, as you said, an income multiplier. Because typically around this area, if you wanted to rent a quite a cute little 2-bed cottage in Broadway, North Cotswolds, for 3 nights in the summer, you're going to be paying 900 quid. Well, you don't have to do that many weekends before you're adding and running up a substantial amount of income, which you would never get valued on an investment basis, because if the owners sell, it's just a house. Okay, it's Broadway. It'd probably sell for 600,000 anyway, but nevertheless, it's just a house. It's a bit like, take away the icing and underneath they're all just fruitcakes, no matter how pretty the decorations. That's how I think of it.
So just continuing on from that theme then, Christine. Yeah, you heard what Sam was saying about the difference between service accommodation and holiday letting. What did you think of that? It's not Sam's view; it's the lender's view.
No, I understand that. I mean, I was a registered valuer for many years. I'm not a registered valuer now, so I don't do valuation work anymore because you have to do a minimum of sort of 15, 20 a year to keep your registration, and also pay the RICS a ton more money. And I already pay enough being a fellow. It's twice as much as a MRICS. Thank you. I don't know what I get for that. I don't think I get anything, but there you go.
Get a badge or something.
I get a badge. I get a big badge. I'm a fellow, it should say. So it's quite a few years since I've done anything sort of on the ground, as it were, and things change all the time, and the valuer has to be driven by the lender, because when an instruction lands on your desk on a Monday morning, can you go out and value X? You have to ask yourself several questions. The first one of which is, what type of valuation is this? And that's driven by the type of property and the use of the property, and maybe the planning of the property, planning use. And then you have to think, what's the purpose of the valuation? Is it for sale? Is it for purchase? Is it for probate? Is it asset valuation for a business? Is it a local authority, valuation just in use? Is it a specialist building? Or are you actually valuing a building that's owner occupied as a business? And then that's a whole different stream, because you are valuing the business actually, which occupies that property. EBITDA, as Sam said.
Yeah.
And what you get out of that calculation is the amount of rent that they could pay for that building based on their business, which might be good, bad, or indifferent, who knows. And that rent is then calculated by virtue of an investment yield to give you a capital sum. But that is typically more used in specialist buildings, like things like care homes. That's how you value a care home. Assess the rent by EBITDA and then capitalise it with an investment yield. That's how they're done.
Yeah. That makes sense.
I was going to say something else. I can't think what it is, but I have been awake since 2:30, so you maybe forgive me a little bit.
have a sip of wine.
Might have to, actually. It might wake me up, or alternatively, it might send me to sleep. You just never know. Actually, yeah, that was it. You mentioned somebody mentioned a house, and every room has an ensuite. And is that just a slight aside? I lived in Bristol for many years. I had various flats, and when I bought my first house and I went house hunting, I went to look at a very nice Georgian flat-fronted place in Clifton in Bristol. It was a lovely house, but when I went in, I thought, "Gosh, this is a bit weird," because there's a beautiful big kitchen, living room, sort of in the half basement. So there was a light in the pavement, nice big garden, because it was on a slope. Every single bedroom had an ensuite. Every single bedroom, and every single bedroom had a little stand for a TV and a video. And I thought, wow, this place is weird. There were no bathrooms, you see. You know what I'm going to say, don't you? So then I was talking to someone, and we had a friend who was doing an MA, and to earn money, he was driving taxis for extra money. And I said to Darren, I've seen this really weird house. And he went, "Oh, I know that. Something, 10 Wellington Place or whatever it was." I said, "I take girls up there quite often from the city centre. It's a brothel." So I went, "Oh, I've never been in a brothel before." And I have to say, I've never been in one since. But I just thought it was, that would be another possibly commercial use.
I'm curious about the TV stand now then, but
I didn't want to think about that anymore. That was the thing that struck me as being really odd. More than the every ensuite in every bedroom, no bathroom, was the fact that...
I'll take that as a good thing, Chris, that you didn't know what the TV stand was.
Well, yes, I think because there's the days of innocence.
So I take it you didn't buy it then?
I didn't buy it. No, I didn't buy it. No, I didn't want people turning up at 3 a.m. knocking on the door.
No, that's right. That's right. And Lisa's got a few stories about that, but I won't go down that particular road.
Maybe over a glass of wine. Maybe over a glass of wine.
Lisa's got her.
It makes me sound like I was a prostitute. I wasn't. I just want to clarify that.
When you invest in property, it's amazing what you come across, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Actually, yeah. It's amazing.
Should we move on to leases?
Oh, please. Yes, absolutely.
So there's lots of, well, I suppose we could split this into commercial and residential. That's sort of one thing. And how we should. So I was just thinking, maybe we start with residential.
Yeah.
And if we cover sort of things like short leases, maybe enfranchisement in terms of buying the freehold, that type of thing, and how an investor can add value through changing a residential lease, if we look at it from that.
Yeah, sure. So we're talking here about effectively what started off as a long lease, even though it might be short now. Yeah. By the inflection of time. So typically flats, although of course there have been leasehold houses, but a flat typically, the first thing I think that a lot of investors don't really get their head around is that when you buy a flat, you're not actually buying a flat. What you're buying is the right to occupy a space marked by a red line in a building for a specific period of time, typically 99 or 125 years if it's a new lease, for a capital sum, which is basically all that is all the rent up front in one lump sum. So, but paying it all up front does give you an asset that you can sell. But as time goes on, that lease is a depreciating asset, just like a lease on a car is a depreciating asset. And over time, as years tick off, tick, 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 it gets less and less valuable. Obviously, market forces may force the value up because of shortages or popularity or whatever. But fundamentally, all other things being equal, every year that passes by, that lease gets shorter.
Apply that to, sorry, Christine, you can apply that to timeshares effectively.
I suppose you can, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
As that they get more and more, they actually do get less in value to generally to sell.
As your time's running out, effectively, yeah. So there's a couple of things you can do. First of all, you can extend your lease. So you have the statutory right to extend by 90 years at the moment. Obviously, Genrix published this bill. He says he's going to pass, and whether we'll see it fully come to fruition, I don't know. The proposal is to extend by 990 years, which gives you effectively a virtual freehold, except there are still common parts. There's still the structure of the building because you've only got the space inside your leasehold bit of that building. And the lease itself is basically no more or less than a contract between two parties, hopefully freely entered into, and it contains terms which place obligations on both parties and gives both parties rights. So the landlord generally has the right to do all sorts of things like redevelop parts of the site, develop on land adjacent, but more reserves the right to further develop the property. So that's quite handy now for them because they put the 2 floors on top. They've got the perfect right to do that in most leases. But they do have obligations which are set out in statute but are usually put in the lease as well, such as they have to give the tenant quiet enjoyment, they have to give the tenant right of support and protection from the rest of the building. Usually the landlord has to insure the building and then you pay a share, your proportionate share, normally based on floor area because that is a fair and reasonable way to do it, your contribution. And then repairs and maintenance, whether that's of the building or the common parts or the landscaping or the car parks or the security fence or, all the, depending on the size and scale of development, all those costs will go through a service charge, and the tenant, the leaseholders jointly pay those costs. And normally that's managed, that process is managed by a managing agent who, and I know block managers, that is the technical term for a management company who manage blocks of flats rather than individual properties, generally have a terrible reputation. And the ones that are arm's length from the freeholder should be in the property redress scheme. They're subject to the RICS code of service charge management, or they ought to be, because if you end up in if they end up in a tribunal against the leaseholders, they need to be able to demonstrate they've done what they ought to have done. And the tribunal will look at the RICS code and say, have you complied with this? So it's not absolutely they must, but if they got any sense, they will. Unfortunately, there is a loophole in that the owner of the building can manage the building either themselves or through staff that they employ or a subsidiary company that belongs to them, and they don't have to be in the redress scheme, and they don't have to comply by the RSS code either. So that is obviously a massive bone of contention for leaseholders who are unhappy with service charges for one reason or another. So you've got the right to extend the lease. You've also got the right to enfranchise, which is by the freehold. There are requirements at each stage. So the building itself has to qualify. There are various qualifying things that you have to be able to tick that are covered. And then the leaseholders have to qualify. And provided you can tick all those boxes and you can get a sufficient number of leaseholders to join with you, you can either do, that's exactly how I feel, sorry, I'm going to yawn in a minute as well. It's all right, it's fine. You can, if you can get sufficient numbers of leaseholders to join with you, then you band together basically, and you either you enfranchise. That's how you do it, or you go down the right to manage route. Personally, if I had the choice of, well, shall we do right to manage? Shall we enfranchise? I would, every day of the week, I would enfranchise every single day. It probably costs you a bit more money, but it gives you complete control of that building because you then step into the shoes of the freeholder. Now, you would do that through forming a company to hold the freehold rather than in your each individual names. You wouldn't hold the freeholders, Mr. A, Mrs. B, Miss C, because for a very simple reason, actually, because if, God forbid, one of you died, nobody would be able to do anything with their flat until probate had been granted. You can't have power of attorney in those circumstances. So you form a company, you all become directors, the ones who are buying the freehold, and it doesn't have to be everybody, every leaseholder. And then you own the freehold. So suddenly you're the boss. But you've got to remember you've got two hats. You've got one hat as the freeholder, and you've got another hat as a leaseholder still, which you are. And you have to be fair and reasonable to all the leaseholders, including the ones who didn't want to come in and buy the freehold with you. But it does mean that you can do things like extend your own lease to 9,990 years for no premium. You can amend clauses in your lease that you don't like, such as you can't do serviced accommodation or Airbnb. So you've seen that more and more in flat leases, new ones. You can remove that clause. And if you did that with the existing freeholder, they'd want some money off you if they would even agree. They'd say, well, we'll do that, but we want £10,000. So all that is gone. Any other clauses in there that you think are unfair, then you can, or unreasonable, or you just don't like, you can remove, amend, alter. You don't have to do that on all the leases. You don't have to just offer that for nothing to the leaseholders who didn't join the enfranchisement. They, instead of going to the old freeholder and saying, can I do Airbnb? You're now the person saying, yeah, okay, that'll be £10,000, please. So it's actually every day of the week I would enfranchise rather than right to manage, if I could.
So in that situation, and it's a good example, Christine, where you grant new leases to allow things like service accommodation or to change the ground rent, etc. I mean, that would be...
Yeah, you could remove your ground rent to make it a peppercorn. Everybody else is still paying whatever they pay. You pay peppercorn.
Would you recommend, obviously, that all the new leases were exactly the same, and that would assume keep your legal costs down, but I can see a situation whereby, flat one wants to be able to do service accommodation and flat two doesn't, and you can start getting into different leases as well. Is that...
well, the leases at this point would already exist.
The old leases?
Yeah, the existing leases. I mean, your lease still exists. You might buy a lease that's got 60 years left on it, and you go through the enfranchisement process. You become one of the directors of the company that own the freehold. Your lease still exists because you're a director of, the building limited or whatever you call the business. But as a leaseholder, you are in your individual name. They're two different legal entities. The fact they're both you is irrelevant. See what I mean? So you can extend your own lease at no cost.
So,
but you still make the others pay who didn't join the enfranchisement.
Yeah, because they're sort of they're not in the gang, are they?
No, they're not. They're not in the gang. They're not in the gang.
So, in the example whereby you took a house and split that into 3 flats,
yeah,
and the freehold was separate, so you own all 3 leases.
Do you mean when you say own? Do you mean you have the freehold?
Sorry, yeah. So you've got the freehold, maybe in a company that
you set up. You would want to do it in a company rather than your own name, because God forbid you might get run over and then the whole thing just crashes to a halt. Yeah.
But what you talked about earlier, absolutely.
Yeah.
So you've got a freehold in your name, and then you converted the house into 3 flats. You've issued 3 new leases. And they're in your name as well, but they're in a different company. You
could do that. You could do that. Yeah, absolutely. You could.
I'm hearing that lenders don't like that. They don't like that.
Well, because the more normal way to do it would be during the conversion. Really, when you first start planning the conversion, you get your estate agent on board. You get or your solicitor on board. You get the model lease that you want to use done.
Yeah.
You get the service charge spreadsheet properly set up, so each lease is paying the correct proportion of all the various elements of the property. On a 3 flat property, they'd probably be identical, but on a 20 flat property they might not be, because you wouldn't ask the ground floor to pay for the lift, for example. So there are variations to that model. So you would have all those things set up, ready to go, and you would start marketing those flats off plan. And you would provide that information to the estate agent so that they know exactly what it is that they're selling.
Yeah.
And then when you get a buyer, then you grant the lease.
I was thinking more in a position whereby you retain the 3 flats.
Oh, I see, to let them all out. Well, yeah, you can do that. It's best if you don't have them. I mean, you can have all leases in your own individual name if the freehold's in a company, but you're right. I don't think lenders do like that these days. Back in the old days, when it was like the Wild West, when I bought my first property in 1981, and in those days, you could do basically whatever you wanted, and the mortgage lenders just didn't care. Sam's too young to remember all this, but I bought my first house on a 95% mortgage. The seller gave me a 5% discount. The mortgage company were fully aware of it, so I ended up with a 100% mortgage. And they went, yeah, that's fine. It's not a problem. I mean, can imagine doing that now? No. So there's all sorts of things that lenders don't like now that they wouldn't have cared a hoot about even probably 10, 15 years ago. And that would be one of them.
In your perspective, from a surveyor's perspective, from a RICS perspective, legal perspective, there's no issue with a freehold in the same sort of ownership, although a different legal entity.
No, not at all. It's very, very common with businesses where the partners own property that they operate their business out of. So the freehold will be owned in one company name with all the directors of the company, and the leases will probably be in various names depending on which. Say, take a chain of estate agents, 6-branch chain of estate, and they own all the properties. It's Fred Bloggs Estate Agents Limited own the freeholds, and then you probably have each lease in one of the partners' names because that's the office that they run, and that's absolutely fine. Or you could do it in a different name than that, but what you can't do is have the freehold and the leasehold in exactly the same legal entity, whether that's a person or a company. Once those 2 things coincide, the lease is automatically extinguished. It ceases to exist. So
why is that a problem?
You can't have a landlord and a tenant of the same person.
Yeah, it's because the leases get extinguished.
Yeah, legally the leases would automatically be extinguished. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you say, this is an example that I had from years ago when I was head of property at one of the estate agents, where we bought a chain of estate agencies and the freeholds were owned in the name of the 6 partners. And the lease of this particular property, which was an absolute nightmare, it was like the most hideous, it was over rented, it was too big, it was in the wrong part of town, it was just a very short order, it was closed. And then we had the problem, we got a 25-year lease, massively over rented. I wasn't responsible for buying this, by the way, just want to put that out there. And it was only by luck. The leases were held, the lease was held in the name of, sorry, I've got that wrong way around. So there were 6 partners, but the freehold was owned by 5 of them. The lease was in the name of all 6.
Right.
Okay. So different legal entity because of the number of people.
Yeah.
During the period between exchange of the contract to buy the business and completion of the contract to buy the business, the partner who wasn't on the freehold died.
Right.
So then you have the situation, and it only lasted 2 days, where the freehold and the leasehold were in the same name. And at that point, the lease ceased to exist. So I got myself, I was probably being called all sorts of names, uphill and down dale, but I served when you're a quarterly commercial tenancy, you give a quarter's notice and you just walk away. So I served a quarter's notice and we just walked away. And they did kick up quite a fuss at the beginning, but they realised actually that they were wrong, that it was absolutely fine. Yeah, so that was interesting. It's by operation of law. It's not because the RICS says so, or whoever says so. It's just a legal fact that you cannot have a landlord and a tenant, the same legal entity, whether that's a person or a company. There's all sorts of little niggly things about leases. Yeah. The other things about long leases are there's often quite heavy restrictions on repairs, what you can do, what you can't do, structural, non-structural, when you need permission. The freeholders basically have carte blanche to charge whatever license fee they want. Doesn't even have to be reasonable. They can charge their legal fees. They can charge their surveyor's fees for looking at the plans and documents, and this can add up to several £1,000s if you want to do something fairly simple, but it's deemed to be structural. So if you, I see a lot of people asking questions in Facebook groups about how can I reconfigure this flat? I'd like to move the bathroom over there and put the kitchen over there. The minute you start doing that, that's structural. You really don't want to go down that route because you're going to end up paying a lot of money for a license if they'll even allow it. And a lot of them won't allow it because the services in a block of flats are designed so all the dirty services, if you like, go down one, right, and all the clean services come up another. So they don't want you swapping those over. They just say no.
So you mentioned, okay, I've got a question, but I'll let Andy ask.
Hi, Christine. Thanks for your help. Really
That's all right.
What happens if you just do the work, do it? Don't ask for permission. Well,
okay, if you're doing don't ask permission, no, you won't get forgiveness. What you'll probably get is a notice of an irremediable breach. There are 2 types of breaches of leases: remediable, i.e. ones that you can put right. So, I let it out on Airbnb and that's not allowed. I'll stop letting it out on Airbnb. Ooh, I've painted the windows the wrong colour. You repaint the windows the right colour. But irremediable, I can't hardly say it. Irremediable breaches are things that you've done that are more serious than that. And if you've done structural works, you can't undo the structural works because you've altered the structure. That is an irremediable breach. And the freeholder will be within their rights to forfeit your lease. And that they would just forfeit your lease and you would lose flat, basically. So you don't want to do anything as serious as that.
So this is sort of quite serious then, is it? Because
very.
My question before Andy was asked his good question was, what is structural? Because you said about moving like bathrooms and kitchens around. I started thinking, well, if I moved a tap, a few centimetres,
No, that wouldn't be. That wouldn't be. When you're talking about altering the routes of services in the building, or and partition walls are non-structural. So if you moved a partition wall, that'd be fine. But if you were talking about increasing the size of a window opening, if you're on a ground floor, changing a window for French doors, those are structural works.
Okay, so it's not as bad as I thought. I mean, if you can move a partition wall,
yeah,
obviously any electrics, If that's, you're not counting that.
Yeah. No, that's non-structural. No.
What about
if
you occupy the loft space of something that's already got a hatch in there, and you say, I'm going to put a room up there, and
is it within the red line on your lease?
Oh, that sounds like it is, right? Because it's
no, I doubt it. I doubt it. The freeholder would always reserve the right to develop further the building sideways or upwards. So I've hardly ever seen a lease, no matter how old, where the roof space is demised to the top floor flat.
I've definitely seen that. In
You
fact,
have?
I talked to a guy last week who wanted to develop the roof, but knew he'd exactly that. He'd sold the roof space when he did the leases to the top floor, and some of the top floors had started moving into and developing the roof space.
Right. So that it was within their demise.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that is quite unusual. But again, you see, if you're going to go in the roof space in the loft, are you going to want to you're going to have some sort of windows in there, maybe a Velux or a dormer. You're going to have to extend the electrics up into there, potentially the services, water, if you're going to put a shower room up there and a bedroom, or, it depends on the extent and degree. They might have demised the roof space to you, but can you actually use it without doing any structural works? If you can't, then I wouldn't go down that road. If they've demised it to you, basically all you can use it for is storage, unless you can get permission to do more than that.
Yes, it's interesting. In fact, this building is in St Albans. It's quite a big building just off Sandpit Lane, for those who know it. And it was, the guy showed me there's Velux windows in some of in the roof, and he's developing. He's got quite a few blocks of flats, and he's definitely developing space in some of the roofs. But he knew in this one
he could.
Sold off the roof.
He may have an old lease which gave him originally an old lease which gave him the right to do alterations of that type, because sometimes it says no structural alterations except for you can put a window in here, or you can do this, or you can do that. There's in the older ones there were sometimes exceptions to that rule.
So any more questions on that, Andy? Did that answer your point?
It did. I could probably ask a million load around this. If you occupy the space, and let's say you buy it, there's a hatch there already been provided by the freeholder or the original builder. You have access to that loft space. You fill it up with all your storage, and then the freeholder comes along and says, "I'm going to stick 2 stories on top under permitted development."
Yeah.
Well, no, I'm occupying that space, and you gave me access to that space. So
no, the fact there's a loft hatch there doesn't mean that you have access. Someone has access. They probably need access for maybe there's some services that run through the loft, or something that requires access, but it's not necessarily for you, in the same way that you can walk through the front door into the hall and stairs. You can't go occupying the hall and stairs. And it's exactly the same. If you think about it as one of the common parts of the building, in exactly the same way as the entrance hall, the stairs, the lift, the car park, you wouldn't set up a tent in the car park and say, well, I'm occupying this space, It's mine now. The fact you can do it in a loft without them knowing for quite some time doesn't change the principle that you can't use it. No. Sorry.
I know of another example, again in St Albans, where
St Albans is a very unusual place.
Well, this is a leasehold flat was sold. The survey said that it identified that a boiler had been put into the roof space, which is actually quite common.
Yeah.
And the seller had to move the boiler as a condition of the sale. So, the freeholder didn't know that. Obviously. Well,
you don't tend to inspect lofts when your agent's just going around inspecting flats or whatever.
No.
It always comes out in the end, though, somewhere. Mm-hmm. And you can't acquire rights by prescription or adverse possession in a leasehold building like that. No. So you can't say, my boiler's been there for 20 years, so I have adverse possession. It doesn't. Just say you're in breach of the lease, move that boiler or else.
So when you read a lease, is there a special course to go on of Old English that allows you to understand?
No, you just have to read lots of leases, and you have to try and keep up to date with the case law. There's an awful lot of case law on leases, which can sometimes take you by surprise as to the judge's interpretation. And when they're in the higher courts, of course, they're binding. Just a very quick and what might seem like a silly example on a commercial lease. If you take a full repairing lease of, say, an office block or a factory or, whatever, generally the lease will say that the tenant must keep the property in good and tenantable repair. Now, that seems perfectly straightforward. Everybody thinks they understand that. You take the lease and think, well, it's a bit shabby now, so I'll just keep it sort of up together so I can use it and everything will be fine. There was a big dilapidations case where the freeholder claimed hundreds of thousands of pounds in dilapidations at the end of the lease to put the property back into proper, full repair. The tenant said, that wasn't what I signed up to. And the judge said, to keep the property in good and tenantable repair means put and keep the property in good and tenantable repair. So that is what that phrase actually means. You have to insert the words, even if they're not written down. The other, I know, bizarre. That might have been Lord Denning. He was responsible for lots of weird and wonderful judgments. The other thing is about rent. What is rent? You might think, well, I know what rent is. Rent is either rent, you pay quarterly, annually, 6 monthly, or if it's a commercial building, or it's ground rent on an apartment, but you have to be very careful about the wording of the lease, because any sum due under the lease can be reserved as rent. So your contribution to the buildings insurance can be reserved as rent. Your contribution to the service charge can be reserved as rent. It's a very specific legal phrase. What that means is if you don't pay it, the freeholder can forfeit your lease. So I always say to all my leaseholders, you can challenge the service charge as much as you want, make their life hell, but pay the service charge. Because if it's reserved as rent, which it is in your lease, on the occasion that it is, once it's 3 months in arrears, you're in trouble. Pay it. And you only have to miss 1 quarter and you're 3 months in arrears. So you must pay it. You can write every single time and tell them, I'm paying this under protest because I dispute this. You can say all that, that's fine, but you must pay it. Unless you want to just have the flat taken away. And then the mortgage company will get very, very upset with you.
Yeah. Very
upset indeed.
Okay. So that's really interesting on the rent side. I was just going to, I would like to talk about layering. I know you don't like to.
Yeah, that's all right.
Before we do that, I was going to open it up to anybody else to see if they've got any questions. And it also...
Christine, quick question on we touch base on the structural changes. One of the flat I have recently seen, it has got a potential where I can move the kitchen into an open plan and then convert the kitchen into a bedroom. So would that be a structural change?
Yes, it would. Yeah, because you're altering the services, the way the services run in the building. So that would definitely be a structural change. Definitely.
So even
when you're going to look at, is this one you've just looked at rather than one you already own?
No, I've just looked at.
Right. So the thing I always say to people when they're looking for flats as investors is you're not buying the flat, you're buying the lease. And the lease gives you the right to occupy the flat, the space and do certain things. And it prevents you from doing other things. So the one most important thing that you have to look at, even if you don't look at the building, you've got to look at the lease. You've got to know what the lease says you can and can't do. So but when you go to the estate agent and say that's all very well, oh, it's nice flat, but I need to see the lease. They'll go, well, we haven't got a copy. You'll get that once it's in solicitor's hands. Yeah, exactly. You can download them off the land registry for about £4.50. Might be a bit more than that now. You must get hold of the lease before you ever buy a leasehold or make an offer on one, because there might be something in there which is a deal breaker for you. I mean, it sounds like that to you, that would probably be a deal breaker. So if you're not allowed structural alterations, then what you can say to the agent is, I'd like to make an offer, provided that I can do some alterations, which I believe would be structural. So obviously I need consent. Can you just sound out the freeholder, or can the current owner sound out the freeholder about their views on structural alterations? And the answer you probably get is, I don't know what you're talking about, and nobody knows the answer to that question. In which case, then you have to think, well, is it easier to buy something else?
Okay, fine.
You know,
yeah. Okay. And
if you have to do those works to make it worth your while, then probably, unless you can get the information, then you shouldn't go ahead.
Right. Okay. And one last question on
Yeah.
the HMO thing. Before making an offer, is it worth engaging a valuer or surveyor to see what would be the potential value as a commercial valuation?
It's probably worth, if you know a friendly valuer, you know someone, then it's probably worthwhile having a chat with them about describing the property, where it is and how it is, i.e. how many bedrooms, how it's configured and all that, and saying, do you think that would be a commercial valuation, or do you think it would just be a comparable as any other house? And there's no guarantee that the valuer they send out will think the same way. That's the only thing. But at least you get a steer, don't you?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
you could pay your own valuer to do your valuation. They would use their judgment as to whether it was investment or comparable method. But that might not be the judgment of the surveyor that the lender sent out. So you can never be absolutely sure. But generally speaking, the bigger it is, the more likely it is to be a commercial valuation. The smaller it is, the more likely it is to just be a house.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you mentioned about the friendly valuer. I don't have anyone. If you want to find anyone, how do I find it?
Well, all valuers will, will chat to you, because people don't tend to talk to us really. They all hate us. All right, that's what I found when I was doing valuation work, because you can never please anybody. So if you go on the RICS website and just put in find a surveyor, it will. There's a search function there. You can search by skill, i.e. residential valuations, commercial, residual, development, all sorts of other things. And then you can search by area, and it'll give you a whole long list of firms. And if I was thinking of buying, another buy to let, I don't know, I'm from Manchester, so I know that area, but say in, I don't know, Scotland, for example. Then I would try and find a couple of firms locally, and I would give them a call and ask to speak to the valuer and just have a 10-minute chat with them. Most surveyors will do that because it's really unusual, especially when you're working as a valuer, for people to ring you and actually talk to you like a normal human being. Normally, all they want to do is shout at you because they don't like a report that you've done. Or they don't like the value, or they don't like the way you've done it, or they don't agree with the way you've done it. They're all keyboard warriors. So it's all valuers will talk to you.
Oh, okay.
Like if you talk to them like a real person, they will talk to you back like a real person.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Good questions, Manik. Thank you very much. But that just following on from that, Christine. So the whole engagement with valuers seems difficult, and I think that's interestingly what you've raised there. So what's the best approach for someone to have a dialogue with the valuer? Because quite often, as an investor or property owner, you might not even know who the valuer is. You might know someone's coming up at 2:00 on a Thursday. No,
you won't know who it is necessarily. And what you've got to remember is they're not working for you. You might be paying their fee, but they're not working for you. They're working for the lender.
Yeah.
Their client is the lender. Those are the only people they're interested in. Now, if you've done like a refurb and you bought a property and you've done a proper refurbishment of it and changed it from what it was, like the worst house on the street to the best house on the street, obviously there's going to be an uplift in value. That won't necessarily just be reflected by the cost or the amount that the works cost. Although you will find some valuers who are so, they err so much on the side of caution that they will say, well, you bought it for 100 and you spent 30, so now it's 130. When in fact, a fully done up house in the same street might be 230, who knows? But, and so the time between you buying and you selling is critical in that, because the shorter the period, the less likely they are to accept that you've done such an uplift. But what you can do in those circumstances is you can make sure you're there to meet them. You can be nice to them. That's the first thing, because everybody likes someone who's nice to them. And you can have a bit of a chat with them about, you know, the area, and it's worthwhile asking them, do you do a lot of valuations around here? You know, so this is a really popular area. I expect you're here all the time doing valuation. And if they say, oh, no, I never come here, they just sent me up from Birmingham because they were short people, that is a big red flag. And I would probably at that point say, well, do you know what? I don't think you have the right experience to do this valuation. And I'm going to ring the lender or get my broker to ring the lender and ask them to send someone else. No offense to you, but the RICS is actually really clear on this. To be a valuer, you have to have expertise in the area in which you're valuing. And that area depends on what type of valuation you're doing. So if you're valuing a house, basically, it's got to be within 20, 30 miles tops, or else you can't say you've got the relevant expertise. If you're valuing a regional shopping centre, then it would be the country.
Yeah.
If you're valuing Google headquarters in London, it would be Europe. So the area varies hugely, but it's got to be appropriate to the type and size of property. That's a question. So I would absolutely definitely say that. I'd have no qualms about saying that. In fact, they shouldn't be doing that value. They should have toned it down. They should have toned it down. But if they are local and they do 20 a week, you know, within 20 miles, then they are a good person to use, for the lender to use. And if you've done a lot of work, then the best thing you can do is to present them with something that doesn't look like you're trying to teach them how to do their job, but you say, look, here's a folder I made. This is the property details when I bought it, and here's all the photographs we took. Here's the builder's contract, JCT contract or whatever that were used. You won't want to, it's boring to look through, but these are all the invoices for everything that we spent. And these are the after photographs, but you've seen that now. And actually, the reason I bought this property was because I knew that properties done up to this condition sell for X. Because I went to the estate agents and I asked them, and they gave me this information about properties that have sold. And what you're doing is you're giving them the comparables, and you're making their life easier, and provided the comparables are not too old, most valuers would think they'd go and check with the agent, obviously, because the first thing you do when you leave a property is you go to all the local estate agents, just say, what have you sold that's like this? 3-bed, semi in whatever, and they just give them the information, even though it might still be in solicitors and say, well, we got one under offer last week for X or whatever.
Yeah. So, and Andy, did you have a question?
I did, yeah. This, I don't know if this is an appropriate one, but Christine, have you ever been asked by a lender, I'm asking it anyway, or a bank to steer a valuation in a direction based on how that lender currently, that month, that year, that quarter is operating on the
No, and if I was, I'd just turn the valuation down, flat. My professional qualifications are much more valuable to me than one instruction from a lender. What can I say?
That makes sense. No, I appreciate that.
I can't think of a valuer who's currently not in prison who would do that. I can think of a couple of valuers who are currently in prison, so that's why I qualified that. But no, a valuer wouldn't do that. You just wouldn't do it.
It's just that I've created a folder every time I've refurbed the property, and I think I'm just either really unlucky. Every time I've laid it down, the guys pushed it to one side and said, I don't need to look at that. I'm working for the lender, and I'm not interested. So I've just been probably really unlucky.
Well, I'm surprised that they said that, actually, because they are working for the lender, but all they want to be sure, all the lender wants to be sure of, is that they have security for their loan. And the more information you can give them, the better. I mean, in the same way, if they were valuing a flat, they need to see the lease. You have to see the lease. To me, there's no difference in those two things in principle. You see the lease, or you see clearly set out what's been done to the property, and importantly, maybe you put the comps on top then. Maybe you say, before I bought this, the first thing I did was I went to talk to 3 or 4 local agents. They told me about these properties, that I checked it out on Rightmove. They definitely sold for that. So I thought this would be a really good one to do up and sell. So you're sort of, and just in case you're interested, this is all the stuff that I've done, photographs before, and all the, you know, the builder's contract and all the rest of it. You probably don't want to look at that, but it is here if you want it.
I think Andy's experiences alone, though, I have heard other people have similar issues with sort of trying to. So it's back to that dialogue with the valuer, really. You know, so Andy would have taken time and effort to put that together, and it's obviously difficult when that's just completely ignored. Rejected.
I mean, I wouldn't have rejected that sort of information, because you're looking for evidence. Because so what the valuer's got to do now is that, well, they've got 2 choices. Either they ask you how much money you've spent, and they just add that onto whatever you paid because they know what you paid, which is a real shortcut, cheap way of doing it, I think. I don't know why people spend 3 years at uni, 2 years getting qualified to just do that. To me, that's, you know, I could have sent my 15-year-old out to do that, quite honestly. But to prepare the evidence, which they would then have to spend time going out and finding, and residential mortgage valuations are not very well paid. They're not. Maybe that's why you get these people doing them these days. They used to be much better paid than they are now, incidentally. They're really badly paid now. You think you have to drive there, you have to spend some time going around the property, then you have to go to the agents and talk to them, and then you have to do a desktop when you get back, and then you have to fill in the forms. You know, that's probably, you do 3 of those in a day and you're pushing it, and you're getting paid. Well, you may pay the lender his mortgage valuation fee, I don't know what they're like now, a couple of £100. Wow. And he gets half of that if he's lucky. So, you know, it's almost like minimum wage, you know what I mean? So it's
suppose if I was a valuer and an investor gave me a pack, I would just be thinking, well, this is hardly going to be objective. It's not going to include anything that could potentially downvalue it or be negative. So am I just looking at something that's just completely one-sided? I'm just playing devil's advocate, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, but if the valuer went there blind, say if you didn't turn up and he knew nothing about what you'd done, how's he going to value it then?
So I think...
Or she, for that matter.
Sorry?
Or she. Or yeah. how's he or she can...
With gender neutral. So this, I think, leads nicely on, Christine, to buying B&B, but low market value, and then trying to get a valuation at open market or full market.
Yeah.
And any suggestions on how investors should approach that?
Yeah, that's always tricky because a valuer and indeed a lender will always be very suspicious if it appears on the surface that you bought something cheap and you've spent a minimal amount of money on it, and then suddenly it's worth like another 50 grand or whatever. They will think, I'm not really happy about that. It's too short a time period. House price inflation is not going that fast. Even in the heady days of 1988, it was only going 10% a month. It's a very tricky situation. The longer the gap, the more likely you are to be successful. But often that situation relies on there being a short gap between the two events, the purchase and the sale, doesn't it?
Yes,
that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, it sort of works against trying to or obtaining a good deal for whatever reason. I mean, we bought something previously whereby the seller had got a really good deal on a house they wanted. They desperately wanted their forever house. So they were willing to discount the sale of their own home, which we bought.
Yeah.
So it was sort of genuine. And this happens sort of all the time. And it's obviously what investors are looking for.
Well, from the valuer's point of view, you have to think about what duty they have to the lender in the way they do the valuation. So they have to use comparable evidence to value that property. So if the best comparable evidence is your prospective purchase effectively, then that's what they're going to use. If you're saying I'm only paying £100,000 for this house, their automatic reflex will be then it's worth £100,000. It won't be, well, next door sold for 150. It'll be, that was a fluke. The 150 was a fluke, not the 100. Always. Yeah. I had a client who bought, he'd bought one property really quite well below market value in a particular street. And then he was buying another one, which wasn't quite so much below market value, quite a short time afterwards. And he couldn't understand why the valuer downvalued it. So let's say he bought the first one for 100 and he was buying the second one for 110. The valuer came along and he valued the second one at 100. And he said to me, why has he done that? I said, because you've just provided him with a perfect comp. It's 3 doors away. It's 2 months ago. He doesn't need to look at anything else. You've provided him with a perfect comparable when the first house you bought. That's it. End of story. He's not going to look anywhere else.
Right.
So he was obviously very disappointed by that. But there's just no way around that. None at all.
Right. So it's sort of, I mean, obviously, you know, investors were still aimed to purchase B&B.
Yeah.
But it looks like it's very difficult to sort of get your money out.
To justify, to get your money out, you have to wait. You have to wait for time to sort of smooth that difference away. Okay. Do some work probably again for the cost of the cost profile to be smoothed over, so that you can say, well, I moved it from this to this over a reasonable period of time, and those are and let him find his own comparables, and then you get it valued up.
Okay, so I think this is a perfect time then to move into sort of title splitting, which is a way to perhaps release some value that otherwise is difficult to get at.
Yeah, sure.
Should we talk about? Should we move on to layer? And unless anyone's got any questions on what we've just been talking about.
All I was going to say is that Christine has just followed Sam on the same thing. Sam said, "Don't try and borrow money after buying a BMW," didn't he?
Yeah.
I know it's the same thing, but
I didn't hear that, so I'm glad to see that we agree with each other.
Yeah, no.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, it's exactly the same reasoning, but it's coming from both sides. I now can see the why that's behind what Sam is telling us not to hope for anymore, and. I'm kind of second guessing Andy, and he's been disappointed, but their first valuations, Andy, you've been creating these flats, haven't you?
Andy?
I missed that last.
He's on mute.
I was saying, Andy, weren't the ones that you were having trouble with the valuer, weren't they newly created flats that you've built? Not with your bare hands, but converted.
Yeah, so they were ones that I'd converted. It was a kind of mixed-use commercial to residential conversion, and it was quite unique in the area, so comparables were quite impossible. It was a bit of a non-residential area, but there was a big block of flats being built, and there was a lot of new build in the area, so comparables were quite difficult. It was odd shape, and so, I did everything. I did what I thought was comparables, put all the receipts in, put the JCT contract in front of them, put, what I could see as being everything. But it was dismissed. And I've had it on other just general buy-to-let refurbs on standard terraced houses where almost, maybe my approach or my forthright and forceful approach has been.
Or maybe your coffee's rubbish. That's what he didn't like.
Yeah.
Or you didn't give him chocolate biscuits.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I just got, I've had a couple where people have come in and gone, this is a lovely property, and then they've gone away, and I thought that's definitely going to get upvalued, and it's come back undervalued to what I expected. So just trying to get the sense around it, Sue and Christine, is I still
struggle. There's not always a lot of sense, I'm afraid. Valuers are as far as the RICS is concerned, they're sort of like a special case, which is now why they now have separate valuer registration and all the rest of it. They call valuation an art and a science, and the RICS do not expect valuers to be within 10% above or below the correct, if there is such a thing, value.
Sorry,
that's a huge.
That's a big margin.
It is a big margin. It is a big margin. So on £150,000 house, you can be 15 grand under or 15 grand over, and the RICS, if you raise a sort of objection, will say it's within 10%. It's fine.
The only time I got away with a blinder, I had a particularly unusual house, and I actually came up with some comparables and said it's not worth as much as X, but it's worth more than Y. And and it was really about location rather than about the house.
Yeah.
There were 2 or 3 vaguely similar shaped houses on similar plots, but one of them was in a far nicer area and one of them was in an inferior area. And I kind of said to him, that I wanted to drop it basically between those 2 figures.
Yeah.
And
so it's something more unusual. It's easier to make that distinction. Even the valuer would find it easier to make that distinction. But if you're talking about, I know Andy said you were talking about flats, which in an area where there aren't many flats, so I suppose they're distinguished by that. But if you're talking about a terraced house in a row of other terraced houses, it's very difficult to make that distinction. Very difficult indeed, no matter what you do to that property, because from their point of view, an owner-occupier could have bought it for the 100, spent 20 on it, and they could be living in it. So why isn't it just worth 120? I know that seems like a completely perverse way of thinking. So I've got hiccups now. Perverse way of thinking about it. Too much wine already. But that is how they think. And the more vanilla the property, the more that will be the case. Whereas if you have a really unusual house, particularly sort of one-off houses, I mean, if you take a one-off house in the country, if you take, Cheltenham's not a million miles from me, and there's a local developer around here, and he's built 3 or 4 absolutely distinctive glass, effectively, houses, massive amounts of glass across the planet. They are really lovely if you like everybody looking at you all the time. So how do you value that? Well, valuers will say, we never do residential off square feet. No, that's not the way to do it. I can tell you, every single valuer, when they get a property that's slightly unusual, will look at properties of a similar size in a similar location, even if it's not right next door, of a similar specification, or in an unusual design, or there's something distinctive about them, and they will break that valuation down to a square foot, and they will multiply it back up to your property. So there will be
a problem with mine just recently. Mine's one of a mirror. I've got one mirror image of mine, and then all other houses around me are smaller in size and different, lower spec. And I had, just when it came down to the original, trying to even just put it on the market, let alone getting a proper valuation done, there was 150,000 difference from one, from one estate agent to others.
Yeah, I can believe that. Estate agents are often even worse at valuing than valuers.
But then
that's possible.
when it came to then, I accepted an offer which was really at the bottom end of the range, and I've subsequently achieved more, I have to say, thank goodness. But then the buyer then had problems getting their mortgage approved, because then the valuer came in and undervalued it and downvalued it again.
Wow.
Yeah. They may have been under the impression that despite the difference in the houses, they were approximately the same floor area. That's a difficult one. So yeah, and there will be a cap in any area on I mean, a friend of ours has got what was originally an original Tudor farmhouse, timber, black and white, near Stratford-on-Avon. Beautiful thing, but very, very eccentric, right? There's plenty of unusual big country houses around Stratford-on-Avon, but there are not very many original Tudor black and white houses. So it just comes down to a rate per square foot, and there'll be a cap in any area. On the bigger, more prestigious properties, there'll be a cap on the capital value per square foot. And so a good way of increasing the value, because value will throw a tape measure around if they have to, under duress, is to look at any space that you've got that you don't properly use and put it into a proper use. And if you've got a bedroom, which if you walk into it and it's got a single bed in, you might think, oh, well, it's just a single bedroom because it's not that big. If you can put a double bed in there, put a double bed in there because it immediately becomes a double bedroom. See, there's a lot of psychology in this as well. And you can influence valuers with things like that. So in bigger houses particularly, there's usually a fair amount of space tucked away in places where it's just like a cupboard that you just shove things in, open it up, use it, turn it into a proper space. And then it's a usable part of the property. And therefore they will use those square feet to multiply up for the value.
Yeah.
And you only have to be, £200 a square foot and 50 square feet. And, every little helps, doesn't it, as they say?
Marvellous. What a great tip. Thank you.
That's really good. Thanks, Christine.
Oh, but we were going to talk about title splitting, weren't we?
Yes, yeah, or layering. I'm going to try and keep layering.
Don't worry, it's fine. If you say title splitting, everybody knows what that is. I talk about title layering, everybody goes, what's that? So this is obviously where you buy a building which is not flats and you convert it into a flat. And that might be an old pub, an old bank. Lots of old banks are being closed at the moment. Some of them in beautiful old buildings in town centres, which make perfect, really, really nice flats. Or it might be an old commercial building, offices or whatever. But when clients come to me with this idea in mind, they're usually thinking, oh God, the freehold is going to be a complete nightmare. What I'll do is I'll set up a company to hold the freehold, and then when the last flat's sold, I'll make all the leaseholders directors and I'll just give it to them. And I always say, oh, why on earth would you do that? Why on earth would you do that? The freehold does value. I mean, with all the changes about ground rents and stuff, it doesn't, marriage value being abolished, it doesn't have as much value, but it still has value for the reasons we talked about earlier. Because if your leaseholders want to do something which isn't allowed in the lease, they have to pay you money for the privilege. And if you retain the right to build extra floors, you can put the extra floors on, you can sell more long leases for capital sums and get a lot more back than your expenditure, usually, on your expenditure on the building, on the build works. So there's lots of advantages to being a freeholder. You can place the building insurance and you can take the commissions, particularly if you own several. You get really good block policy in place and have a big commission from the broker. If you run the management in-house, even if it's through a subsidiary company, you can charge a management fee, which the leaseholders have to pay through the service charge. And I was going to say it doesn't have to be reasonable. You get challenged in the tribunal if it wasn't reasonable, but it can be quite a lot of money before it becomes unreasonable. So if you had 10 blocks of flats, and you were charging each one 100 quid a year or whatever, or a quarter as management fees, and you either outsource that or you employed someone, you could potentially be making quite a good profit on that side of it. Yeah. You don't have to be in PRS. There are all sorts of things, and obviously the biggie is the day you grant someone a 99-year lease, absolutely for certain, or if they've got any sense, within 19 years, they're going to want to extend that lease. Okay, they're going to abolish marriage value. But personally, I do not believe that the valuation methodology will not be adapted to make it, you're not paying marriage value, but you're basically paying the same price to extend. I can't see the freeholders will, the Grosvenors of this world, they're not going to let that go through without a fight. So
on the podcast, I think you were saying there's no point in waiting for the changes.
No, don't wait. Just get on with it. So you've got the lease extensions, which can be valuable.
Yeah.
So you have a thing of value in the freehold, and you need to keep it, or let your leaseholders enfranchise, buy it off you, or give them the right of first refusal. If they don't want it, then you can sell it.
Yeah.
But don't give it away.
Yeah. No,
and you should be thinking about how you structure your leases, the lease terms. A residential leasehold conveyancer, if you say, well, I'm going to create 6 flats, you go, okay, well, here's our standard lease right now. It probably not be what you need to maximize the value of the freehold. In fact, I almost definitely say it wouldn't be what you need. You need to tighten up those terms so that you can extract more value out of the leaseholders, as appropriate.
Yeah. So, we've got this at the minute where the solicitor will be drafting the leases. Do you think there's value in someone like yourself looking at those to see how maybe it could be better drafted, or would you get someone like yourself to draft it in the first place?
I wouldn't draft a lease from scratch, but certainly with the clients I have who do this sort of thing, they get me to take the model lease off their conveyancing solicitor and take my red pen and start changing it to optimize the value of the freehold, because optimizing the value of the freehold is obviously the aim of the game from my point of view for my client. And tighten up the service charge clause, the alienation, which is the assignment right clauses, the user clauses, the alterations clauses, the ground rent clauses, the service charge clause, basically everything. And then alongside that, set up the service charge schedules to make sure that everything's properly documented and there's nothing falling through holes. I've seen leases where originally the freehold had like 35 flats in it, but it was in 4 blocks. And each lease said, pay 1/35 of whatever, building insurance, roof maintenance, da-da. They then sold 1 block and they only had 25 flats. But the leaseholders still only had to pay 1/35. So they had to pay the other 10/35. They had to carry on paying it, even though they sold the other block. So that is the sort of ridiculous terminal lease that you don't want as a freeholder under any circumstances. Yeah. So there's all those things to think about.
No, that's good. I was also thinking in terms of valuations. You're talking valuations earlier. That if you've got freehold, we've got this at the minute whereby we believe we're buying B&B, and we've got good evidence for that. It's how to extract that by sort of title splitting or title layering. So it's like a house.
It's much easier if you're changing a house to some long leases. Sorry, there's a moth coming because I've got the window open. Then it's actually much easier to demonstrate the change in value because you've changed it from one thing to another.
Yeah.
Completely different animal.
Right,
and the valuer will want to see the lease. So you might think, well, if I optimize it for the freeholder, they're going to say, oh, that's a bit sort of tight. There's no wiggle room in that for the lease. So they won't think that at all. They'll think it's actually a really good lease, much better than the ones they usually see, which are woolly about all sorts of things. And woolliness, valuers don't like woolliness. No, they don't. So you want the lease really clean and clear and properly drawn up. Yeah.
Okay, that's really good. I'll just, as time's pressing, I just wonder if there's any last questions from anyone before I ask my last question. Andy, are you?
He's leaning in. Yes.
He's leaning in. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, it might be a hard one to answer, but let's say you have a So I have a freehold property with 4 flats in it, but one of those flats is under mortgageable size, under the kind of, it's about 20 square meters or whatever.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And I have no intention on selling them or splitting them or in any way. So I'm thinking, so I've done everything physical, meter-wise, gas, supplies-wise, as if it was to split the tile. But I've just spent and the bother. I just haven't done it because I thought, why should I?
Yeah.
Keep everything. So I guess question is there any other reason? Should I reconsider that for any other reason, or is it?
Well, no, because the only purpose about creating the leases and service charge schedules is if you're going to sell those long leases. That's the only reason to do it. Or if you need to borrow and the lender won't lend without there being leases in place. But I think, Sam is best placed to answer this, and I don't keep up with the lenders and all their varying criteria anymore. But I think if you've got a block of flats and you that can properly convert into flats that you've done, but you just retain the freehold and you let them all out individually on ASTs, I don't see why a lender wouldn't lend against that. I mean, it would be what they would assess, I think, thinking back to how I might have done that, is each flat individually, the value of it, and then just add them together and probably apply discount for volume. That's how I would have done it.
Okay.
But no need to create the leases unless you need to.
Yeah, my lending's been around a multi-unit block has been quite okay. So that's, again, it's helped the fact that there are MUB multi-unit block mortgages out there. I haven't bothered kind of splitting for the same reason.
No, there's no point unless you're going to sell them off.
Thanks, Christine.
That's all right.
Okay, that's really good. So just a quick summary, Christine. I just wondered, where you see what you're doing yourself in terms of investing, and where you see value, or maybe from a new investor or someone looking to invest. Where would you say is a good place or fruitful place to be looking?
Well, in terms of location, I wouldn't. I only know where I invest. So, having not investigated other geographies, I wouldn't like to say. But in terms of asset type, I've moved more and more away from, well, I think in common with a lot of landlords, vanilla, what you might call vanilla buy-to-lets, just because of all the tax changes and everything else, and more into more commercial and semi-commercial. So holiday lets, serviced accommodation, even some straight commercial. And, even during the pandemic, if you have a building on the edge of town in a really nice sort of Victorian or Georgian or Edwardian building that's now used as offices by a firm of solicitors or surveyors or accountants, the rental income from those hasn't been affected by the pandemic at all, because they're just working as much as they ever did, even though they might not be in the office so much. And they're always going to pay the rent, because the day they don't pay the rent, you report them to their professional body and they make them pay the rent. So you've got someone else doing your credit control, which is always nice. So those types of commercial investments, but obviously there is still a place for retail, but certainly not tertiary retail. I think most of the prime town retail will survive this, but you're talking about multi-million-pound investments there, not for the likes of us, poor people, smaller investors, unless you pool together, of course, in some sort of JV. And I'm looking at one of those at the moment, which will be a significant amount of property, and that will be in the student or supported care sector, because that's another very, very growing sector, supported care. So yeah, that's where my attention's focused at the moment. But I would never pass up an opportunity to get hold of a good freehold building for conversion to flats and sell the long leases and keep the freehold for as long as I could before my tenants enfranchised forced me out. I would never pass that opportunity.
Okay, that's interesting to hear that. You still see value in flat conversions. And
definitely. And the advantage of doing that for me is that I don't have to pay myself to do the lease and the service charge schedule.
You're leveraging your own.
Yeah, I should. I'm leveraging my own expertise. Yeah, exactly.
As indeed we all should, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
Christine, it's been absolutely brilliant having you on.
My pleasure. Do you know what? I might just go straight to bed now because I've been up since 2:30.
I was a bit sensitive to the fact that
No, it's fine. I don't know quite how I'm still this wide awake. But I am. So
it's been really, really interesting. You obviously understand your subject really well, and that comes across. So we're all very grateful, and thank you very much for coming.
My pleasure. Thanks for asking, and thanks for Sue Maxwell-Smith for suggesting.
Yeah, well, yeah, we sort of came together. We sort of collided really, because I've been listening to you on the Property World podcast.
Oh, Will Mallard, yeah.
And he sounds a really good guy.
He is actually, yeah. Sometimes a bit difficult to understand the accent because he's a Kiwi.
Yeah, we will forgive him that.
He said something to me the other day, and I said, "What?" He went, "He sounded like lofts or lofts." I said, "What?" He went, "You know those things that go up and down in the building?" I said, "Oh, lifts." Is the word you're looking for? Oh my God! Yeah.
Yeah. Well, absolutely fantastic having you on. I really appreciate it. And I hope,
that's my pleasure.
I hope everything goes well with the birth of
your... yeah, I'm looking for 2nd of August due date. I've got money on a boy. Seeing as I've got 3 boys, there's all boys in my family. So fingers crossed.
We wish you every luck with
Thank
that.
you.
That goes well for you.
Thanks. Thank you.
So thank you very much. I'll just I've just shared my screen just to say that we're taking a break in August. So we normally, so for Christine's sake, well, anybody else really, we normally have a physical meeting in St Albans. So that's why it's the Alban Property Meetup, and we've run that for 6 years, and it's worked really well. Obviously, we took a change during COVID, and so we're taking a break in August, then coming back in September with the plan to have a physical meeting in September. Christine, you'd be very welcome to attend, and we'd even buy you I was going to say a bottle of wine, but that might...
I wouldn't be able to drive home.
Buy you a glass of wine anyway. That's where we are. I'd like to particularly thank Christine for her presentation today. Or the discussion was fantastic, and Sam, as always, giving us an update on the lending side was very, very, very good as always. So I'll wish you all a very good evening, and I'm going to close the call, and everyone stay safe.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Great. Chris, can I just very quickly say, I'm moving to the West Country imminently, so I'm never actually going to physically meet, but Lisa, if we can try and arrange to meet or chat, at least on Zoom.
Lisa, you're talking, but you're on mute. I don't know.
I'm mute.
She's talking.
Yes.
She's talking.
Yes, of course. Yeah, I think most people prefer it then when I'm talking and they can't hear me. But no, that's fine. Melinda, we'll sort something out. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, because I've got the removal guys coming in the end of next week, so it's all a little bit
okay,
manic,
no problem.
But,
yeah,
I'd still like to keep in touch. So I don't know how we can do that. If it's just reverts to physical meetings, I'm going to be stuffed on that one.
Are you on our WhatsApp group, Melinda?
Yeah, I am.
Okay. Well, you'll see what we're doing anyway. We'll keep in touch that way anyway.
I've really enjoyed the last year of being on it as well. I've learned loads and some really useful introductions as well. So thank you. Just as I'm now about to embark on my property investment journey, now I've got some money.
Well, we wish you every luck.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it's been great having you on. But well, we'll see how you never know in this world what the future holds. So it will definitely stay in touch, and we wish you every success. And we're glad
you guys. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Good luck.
Welcome.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks again, Christine. Cheers.
Bye.